Buckingham Palace was engulfed in a suffocating, ominous atmosphere, as if everything was silently waiting for something inevitable. In the grand reception hall, bathed in the dim glow of crystal chandeliers, King Charles stood alone, his hands trembling, yet his gaze was resolute and fiery. When he spoke, his voice was sharp and strong, cutting through centuries of ceremony and tradition like a blade. "I can no longer be your king." This was not a political decision, nor was it due to any scandal. This is the moment when history changes forever, and the silent yet intense wave begins to rise. An unavoidable decision, a turning point greater than any ceremony as the entire kingdom faces a moment that will forever alter its course. This is something deeper, a humanitarian issue, a diagnosis, kept secret, a body slowly weakening with each passing day, and a promise whispered in the dark. William and Catherine stood still, speechless with no reaction whatsoever. The crown hung suspended in the air, silent yet more resonant than any sound. The royal family had just endured an earthquake, and the very logic, the essence of the kingdom, began to waver from its foundations. So what do you think of this pivotal moment? Do you feel this was the right decision? Leave a 1 if you agree and a 0 if not. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support the channel. King Charles had quietly been battling a devastating illness, fiercer than anything the public could ever imagine. The official announcement released a few months ago only mentioned treatment rest and an optimistic hope, but behind those cold stone walls the truth was far more brutal. It all began with a prolonged fatigue, silent absences from ceremonies, shorter speeches, and sudden departures. However, those close to him began to notice the difference. His hands trembled as if merely standing up drained every ounce of his strength. Then came the silent disappearances, between appointments heading towards a private hospital, all arranged with absolute secrecy. Doctors confirmed it cancer, and not the kind of illness a typical king would face. The turning point came on a cold afternoon in Sandringham. After weeks of physical decline, Charles collapsed during a private policy meeting. He slumped into the nearest chair before anyone could react. The only person left in the room was Prince William. It was the moment that shattered all pretense. That same night, the doctor gave the final prognosis. The disease was progressing faster than any predictions. "Your Majesty, you have little time left, just a few months," they said, not only as king but as a father and grandfather. The next morning, Charles called William into his private chamber. No guards, no courtiers, just the two of them, and a truth that could no longer be hidden. "I want to be with them," the king said softly, not taking his eyes off the photo of his grandchildren. "I want to see them grow up while I still can." The words became even more bitter when thinking of Catherine. Her fight against cancer was only beginning a new phase. Watching her struggle and regain her strength stirred something in Charles, something deeper than admiration. It awakened a pain from long ago. He understood loss and knew that the kingdom would not survive seeing two kings face this invisible enemy at the same time. One of his closest attendants, as Charles, had confessed understood that he could not lead an empire while grappling with the nightmare tormenting him from within. He could not continue like this. This decision was not a sign of failure, but rather a testament to his love for his own flesh and blood, for the memories for moments that could never be reclaimed. It was a struggle between father and son, not taking place in a grand royal hall. but in High Grove, in Charles's private office, where the scent of old wood still lingered and the yellowed papers bore the marks of time. A study that had witnessed important meetings, private family moments, and now the place where an impossible decision was about to unfold. William arrived late in the afternoon. The staff had been sent home early. The silence of the residents was intentional. Charles stood by the window, gazing out at the garden he had spent decades nurturing. He didn't turn around when William walked in. "Father, you can't give up the crown." William set his voice tight like a drawn bowstring. "Not now. Not when the country still needs you." Charles was silent for a long moment before he finally turned around. And for the first time in months, William no longer saw a king but a man completely exhausted. "I no longer have the strength to be the king this country needs, but I can still be a grandfather." He looked William in the eye. "I need to see my grandchildren grow up while I still can. That's all." William clenched his jaw. Inside him, a battle raged between duty and love. Reason urged him to uphold tradition, but the heart of a son reminded him of his mother's faint whispers from long ago and the unresolved pain that now surged back to the surface. Now, the pain was sharper than ever. Then Catherine walked in. She stepped into the quiet storm with the calm only she could bring. She didn't take sides, didn't need to say a word. No words were needed, just one gesture, her hand gently wrapped around William's, as if giving him a new breath, as if whispering that he was not alone. And in that moment, everything changed. William's eyes lit up on the verge of tears. His voice cracked, caught between pain and love. "All right," he whispered. "I'll do it, but not for the crown. For you, Father." This decision wasn't sealed with a royal decree, nor announced under the glow of a grand ceremony. It was recorded in history as a son's promise to his father, a father slowly fading with time. A silent declaration yet more sacred than any crown. The green drawing room, once the quiet witness to Queen Elizabeth's warm Christmas addresses, now held an entirely different hue. Gone were the sounds of festive bells, gone was the light of hope in the eyes of those present. Only the dim light from the crystal chandelier remained casting a sorrowful glow on the king's face. The camera was ready, the curtains had been drawn, and the attendants stood still, barely daring to breathe. Silence blanketed the room, thick, heavy, like a layer of velvet spreading through the space. It was the kind of silence that only appears before truly historic moments. King Charles stood beneath the portrait of his mother, his hand trembling as he unrolled the paper filled with words from the heart. His voice, once a model of calm in crisis, now shattered into fragments of emotion. He looked straight into the camera lens, with a gaze both lost and determined, and began. "I have carried the weight of duty and tradition for nearly my entire life," he said. "But now the time has come for me to pass on that responsibility." He paused. A sharp silence cut through the room's atmosphere. "I abdicate the throne." No one uttered a word. The entire room felt sealed by the weight of those words. She saw Catherine's children as the future, but not necessarily her own future. A former royal staffer shared, "There's a difference, and she acts accordingly." Behind the palace walls, these tensions rarely erupt in public. They're controlled through quiet gestures, in decisions about the schedule, in who gets seen and who doesn't. I declare that Prince William and his wife Catherine will be my successors immediately assuming all the responsibilities of the crown. There will be no formal transition or prior coronation, only a resolute and loving abdication from a father counting down his remaining moments. But for those who listened with their whole hearts, the speech carried a message full of sorrow. My time is no longer measured in years, he added, but in moments. It was a gentle confession, yet as powerful as thunder. There was no political intrigue, only the truth that the clock was running out. The screen went dark, the camera stopped, but the silence continued. Some of those present had served 3 generations of kings, yet now they were witnessing not just a simple transfer of power. They were witnessing the end of an era, and on the very brink of that era, the beginning of a new chapter. William and Catherine stepped into a private room next to the throne room. No cameras, no ceremony, only the heavy responsibility resting on the shoulders of the couple who had just inherited a burden beyond what any crown or scepter could measure. They sat side by side, yet in silence. The future of the monarchy was no longer an abstract concept. It was a living presence breathing down their necks. The air was thick, not from ceremony, but from uncertainty. Finally, Catherine spoke, her voice soft as the breeze. "Are we ready?" she asked, eyes brimming with tears. "The children are still too young." William didn't answer immediately. He stared into the fire in the hearth, lips pressed tightly together, his gaze lost in a future he had never wished for. He had always known this day would come, but not like this. Not with his father's trembling voice still echoing in his mind. Not with the crown falling onto his head before the worst nightmares had even begun. That same night, they gathered their children in a quiet room, away from the world's bright lights. There was no royal ceremony or solemn proclamation, just a father and a mother sitting together, trying to explain to their 3 children that the world had changed. George, the eldest, sat upright with eyes that perhaps his age couldn't fully express the depth of understanding. Charlotte nestled into her mother's arms. Her small shoulders trembled. Louis, carefree and not yet fully understanding, looked around with confusion. "Grandpa is no longer the king." William began slowly. "And now Mom and Dad will have to carry more responsibilities." George furrowed his brow but nodded with a maturity that surprised both parents. "I will help Dad," he said firmly, but Charlotte didn't respond the same way. Her lips quivered and tears streamed down silently without a sob. There was no anger or blame, only the pure pain of a child losing a part of her childhood. Louis furrowed his brow and in a soft voice asked, "Why is everyone crying?" Catherine hugged him gently and whispered something only he could hear. No one knew what she said, only that Louis nodded with wide open eyes before resting his head on his mother's shoulder. That night there were no documents to sign, no messages to deliver to the nation, only William holding George a little longer than usual. Catherine wrapping a blanket around Charlotte and Louis, dozing off while still asking questions. In that moment, this family was not a royal family. Whispers spread like invisible smoke. Could the king muster the strength to carry on? The doubts were never spoken aloud, but now no one could ignore them. The close advisors had long known about the devastating diagnosis: cancer. The early stage brought a glimmer of hope, and the treatment plan was accompanied by gentle words of encouragement. But as time passed, the truth became too clear to hide. King Charles's body weakened week by week. Sudden cancellations, increasingly tired eyes, trembling hands. No one could ignore these signs. The palace continued to issue gentle statements, calls for rest schedule adjustments, but for those close by, it was a thin veil concealing the inevitable collapse. And as Charles gradually withdrew from power, the invisible hands of the monarchy began to move quietly. The constitutional advisors were crafting an unimaginable scenario. What would happen if a king was still alive, but unable to reign and unwilling to abdicate? The United Kingdom had never faced anything like this in modern memory. The crown was not designed to cope with fragility. Ironically, it was at this very moment that Catherine emerged as a symbol of hope. He returned from the battle within himself in silence, but with undeniable strength. His comeback was without fanfare, yet it captured everyone's attention. His resilience became a mirror, forcing the king to confront what he had long tried to avoid facing directly. Perhaps it was time to stop, breathe, and simply live. And then the final warning came one quiet night at Windsor. No beating around the bush, no advice or false hope. The doctor looked him straight in the eye and said, "Stress is accelerating the progression of your illness. If it continues, it will kill you." It was no longer advice, but an ultimatum. That night, no royal officials or attendants were present. Only 3 people sat around a worn wooden table, a father and 2 sons. William, with an urgent yet respectful voice, spoke the words no one dared to say. "What we need is for you to keep living, not just to keep being king." Catherine, her eyes still shadowed by her own battles, added gently, "This is not defeat, but wisdom." For the first time in weeks, Charles neither resisted, denied, nor argued. He simply nodded. Not as someone surrendering, but as someone who understood that true strength is not in holding on to the crown at all costs, but in knowing when to let it go. The next morning, the United Kingdom woke with an indescribable feeling. The abdication was not just a historical event, it was a deep wound in the memory of a nation. Morning light pierced through the thin mist, but the collective heart of the country was more clouded than ever. Outside Buckingham Palace, the crowd didn't need to be summoned. They came on their own, drawn by an invisible force toward the beating heart of the nation. They held newspapers with bold, emotional headlines, "I can no longer be your king." A sentence that seemed simple, yet carried the weight of an entire era's end. Do you think that this act of giving up the throne was a brave and necessary step for a modern monarchy? If you agree, please leave a 2. If you disagree, please comment. 5. Fresh flowers, tear-streaked eyes, thousands standing motionless. Silence had never meant so much. Across social media, waves of emotion spread like wildfire in the wind. 2 opposing hashtags rose like 2 poles, Salvemos al Rey and William Catherine, one filled with pain, the other with hope. And amid memorial videos and edited photos, a gradual transfer of power emerged. Charles of the past, William of the future. The feeling was not just sadness, but understanding. Charles spent a lifetime preparing to reign, yet he was king for only a brief moment. But within that short time, he left an indelible mark, and because of that, a new chapter was written, one built on the unwavering trust the people placed in William and Catherine. Surveys confirmed this, turning collective emotion into numbers. 78% expressed sadness over Charles, but 84% supported the new generation. These numbers were no longer cold data. They were proof of a deep desire shared by a nation choosing to look forward. From Washington to Wellington, from Ottawa to Canberra, messages of support and gratitude began pouring in. The U.S. president made a direct call. Leaders within the Commonwealth issued joint statements. Even the European royal families, usually discreet, bowed in respect, calling it a truly courageous act. But the strongest waves of emotion flowed from distant lands where royalty is more symbol than reality. There they saw in Charles a man who was vulnerable, brave, and humane, and they recognized that the crown was not broken but peacefully passed on. And then the new reality began to seep into every corner of Kensington Palace. Life waits for no one. The abdication not only shook the throne, but also rewrote childhood. A silent gear began to turn. Tutors, ceremonial advisors, and etiquette experts were summoned one by one. William and Catherine's children would no longer enter royalty. Gradually, they would be thrust into it immediately. George, now 12, had become the direct embodiment of the future. He was no longer merely the heir after William, he was the royal family in waiting. Math lessons now gave way to lessons in Constitution soft power and public skills. "And what if someone greets me on the street?" he asked one day. "Can I say no?" He was described as calm and polite. But beneath that serene exterior, the responsibility grew heavier every day. Charlotte, 10 years old, held no official title, yet in the most vulnerable moments she was the soul of the group. She comforted Louis when he cried during lessons. Catherine called George back when he drifted into his own thoughts. No one had assigned her this role, she took it on herself, with a heart both sensitive and steadfast. And Louis, just 7 years old, was the one most deeply affected. He didn't understand why his afternoons, once filled with carefree play, had now become formal performances. He didn't understand why the adult's eyes had grown so serious. Until one day, he broke down during practice and asked, "Can I still be a child?" Catherine knelt down, hugged him tightly, and whispered something only a mother could say. "You will always be a child, Louis." Catherine's days had now doubled in length. From a mother, she had become a queen, not through a coronation, but by standing firm every day amid the storm. Yet no matter how demanding her schedule was, she refused to let the crown dull her maternal instincts. She still told bedtime stories. She still prepared breakfast with her own hands. She still left a warm hug in the palm of each child's hand as she left the room, and in the silent halls of the palace, an undeniable truth emerged. They, as a family, were facing crisis, not with ceremony, but with love. Charles's final farewell, the last gift from a grandfather. That afternoon at Sandringham was unlike any other. Heavy gray clouds hung low in the sky, casting a somber mist over the old estate, a place that had witnessed warm journeys, family strolls in the winter chill, and traditions upheld year after year with quiet solemnity. But this time there were no church bells, no wine, no photographers, only family, and the inevitable silence of an approaching end. King Charles sat near a wide window where the day's last light gently caressed his fully silver hair. He wore no robe or jewelry, no ceremonial sword, just a thin sweater and carefully pressed trousers. His back rested against an old wooden chair, while the flickering fire behind him seemed to struggle to hold on to a bit of warmth for this farewell. No words were spoken. For the first time in a long while, he was no longer a king, just a father, a grandfather, and that was all that mattered. Louis was the first to enter. His carefree nature led him rushing into his arms, his pure laughter breaking the silence like a gentle caress. Charles bent down, embraced him, and pressed his cheek against Louis's chest, where the little heart beat strongly. They played a few games of chess, flipped through some cards, and laughed together. There were no promises or moral lessons, just pure joy with no throne and no titles. George arrived afterward. He was more serious, his eyes reflecting a silent understanding, as if he knew this was not an ordinary visit. Charles motioned for him to sit down, and simply placing his hand on George's shoulder said it all. "You don't have to be perfect," he whispered. "Just carry a gift within you, and live with kindness." George nodded silently, his thoughtful gaze reminding his father of himself when he was young, reserved, yet profound. "Charlotte is the last." She said nothing. She approached quietly and held him tightly in embrace longer than usual. "Thank you for taking care of your siblings," he whispered into her hair, a final tribute to the quiet heart of the family. In the study where political documents and royal decrees were once signed, Charles sat facing William. On the table lay two items, an old gold ring engraved with a message from his mother, and a quill pen that once belonged to George VI, used to sign decrees during wartime. He handed them over not just as heirlooms, but as the burden of a history of a mission. "From now on," he said, "the heartbeat of the kingdom lies in your hands." Catherine then stepped forward. Her face reflected the fatigue of recent months, but her eyes still held an unyielding calm. "We will make him proud," she said, gently taking his hand. Charles looked at her no longer as a future queen or the wife of an heir, but simply as a daughter. "At last," he replied with a fleeting smile, "at last, I can just be a grandfather." There were no cavalry or cheers from the balcony. There was only the fire time and a gentle closing of a chapter, the transformation of Catherine, an unprepared queen, yet one who was chosen. Catherine always thought she would be the Duchess of Cambridge, for decades always standing behind William, raising their three children, quietly contributing to the great story of the kingdom. The thought of wearing the crown before turning 50 had never once crossed her mind. But life doesn't ask if we're ready or not. After fighting bravely against cancer, not only battling physical pain, but also loneliness, sleepless nights, and rediscovering herself, she found something beyond resilience. She found purpose. And it was that quiet strength that helped her step into her new role, not with fanfare, but with depth. Catherine didn't just follow tradition, she quietly reinvented it. Meetings began to take place discreetly within the palace. Changes were made to ceremonies, simplifying protocols, breaking down the invisible walls that once separated the royal family from the people. A monarchy that is more transparent, more approachable, more humane. And almost overnight, the public saw in her something they thought had long been lost: trust. Not because of her title, but because of the way she lived through her illness, the way she endured in silence. And even then she smiled. She wasn't just a queen with duties, she was a beacon, a real woman with real children and real decisions. Her mother, Carol Middleton, was always there, quiet, steady, and unwavering. It was she, her mother, who reminded her, "You are a mother before you are a queen. Don't forget that." And Catherine never did. She still braided Charlotte's hair, checked George's homework, and let Louis sit on her lap during short meetings. Becoming a queen out of duty, being a mother out of love, this wasn't a transformation into someone else, but a revealing of a woman the world had never truly seen. a woman who never wanted to be queen, and that's exactly why she became one of the most beloved queens. When Charles quietly stepped back, no one was outraged. Every royal event is meant to leave a legacy, but it is rare that that legacy belongs to a child who was never meant to attend. Camilla rose from her seat a few minutes later, muttering something about exhaustion. It was sudden but not entirely unexpected. She left without raising a final toast, without a word of farewell to the guests. The click of her heels echoed sharply on the ballroom floor as she exited, and while most bowed or curtsied in respect, the room grew noticeably colder. There were no victory songs. He was not a conqueror, but an heir in uncertain times, a father amid a fractured family, a son forced to be strong against the weight of time. And that changed the image of the monarchy forever. It was no longer a distant institution. It became a family that knows pain, that knows love, that knows how to let go in order to live from the heart. Catherine was always by his side, not just as a wife, but as a voice of reminder that no matter how heavy the crown, it still needs warmth. It still needs truth. And that is what made her the emotional center of a new era. George, Charlotte, and Louis are now growing up in a world where their family did the unthinkable. They won't just be told stories about crowns, they'll be told about the day their grandfather stepped aside so their parents could move forward. And with that gesture, he didn't just leave behind a kingdom, he left behind a change. A new chapter of the crown that didn't begin with a ceremony, but with a goodbye. No songs, no official announcements, just a man in a quiet room placing his hand on his grandson's shoulder and smiling. And that brief, silent moment redefined everything, because the ultimate legacy isn't carved in stone. It's preserved in the smallest moments, in a child's laughter, in a hug, in a whisper in love. For William and Catherine, fate does not wait. It arrives before anyone can be ready. They still carry unhealed scars, private pain, sharp gazes from the media, and the challenge of raising children under a global microscope. But when the moment comes, they don't run away, don't hide, don't deliver polished speeches, nor do they shield themselves behind the glossy veneer of ceremony. They showed up with the most powerful weapon, a courage never rehearsed, so raw it made them tremble. No grand ceremonies or booming music were needed. The transition happened in silence, and it was that silence that spoke the loudest. William and Catherine will not go down in history as conquerors of the throne, but as heirs who chose to bear a burden not out of honor or duty alone, but for the kingdom, for their children growing up every day, and for the humanity within themselves, a part that will never die. The world, long accustomed to the mystic beauty of the monarchy, paused in awe at a different kind of beginning, one without pride, without distance, only fragility and truth. It wasn't the crown or the throne that made them stand out. It was the way they endured pain without giving up on the future. In that moment, not just a generation changed, but their entire family was swept into that wave of transformation. George, Charlotte, and Louis, the children raised on fairy tales, nighttime whispers, and secret hideouts within the castle, now face an unyielding reality. In just one season, their childhood shattered, because the day their grandfather laid down the burden of the throne, their parents took it up with tired but steady hands. And in that loss, something new was born, a quiet strength, not inherited by bloodline, but forged through glances and gestures. They didn't learn strength from the throne. They learned it from everyday life, from silent breakfasts, through difficult nights, in long hugs before bedtime, and whispered words in the middle of the night. They saw their parents carry the legacy with love and understood that sometimes love means not giving up, even when the soul trembles. And the whole country awakened too. The era of a monarchy hidden behind marble walls and outdated ceremonies had come to an end. What now captures everyone's heart is not absolute power, but extraordinary closeness. Not because the royal family became less important, but because finally it became more human. The image of Charles retreating to Balmoral was no longer a silent escape, but a final declaration. He was no longer a king. He was a grandfather, smiling among the rose bushes with a pen in hand and a diary only he needed to read. He didn't leave in defeat, but in peace, leaving behind a powerful lesson. Giving up power may be the strongest act of all. 6 months later, as summer returned to the hills of Balmoral in Scotland, the place was no longer a political fortress, but a home, a place where decisions were once made, now echoing with children's laughter, the whispering wind through pages of books, and the gentle breath of a grandfather who finally lived as a true human being. Charles, freed from his burdens, found himself again in simple things and aimless walks in the peace of a morning without cameras. And with that retreat, he wrote the final chapter 1, without a crown, but crystal clear. William and Catherine prepared for the coronation, but what they were truly preparing for was not a ceremony, but a promise. A promise that this new monarchy would not be born from old illusions, but from transparency, compassion, and an indelible memory of what has been lost. The 3 children understood this and began to stand tall with determined eyes, not because they were taught to, but because they felt that the future was no longer a fairy tale. The public, once skeptical and distant, no longer applauds aloud. Glory rises in silence because they have been moved by the truth. This new monarchy is not built from marble, but from fragments of emotion and healed wounds. The old symbols, the gilded portraits, the noble gazes now give way to real people. People who laugh, who cry, who stumble, and who rise again. A reign ended not with fire or intrigue, but with compassion. And in what seemed like an ending, something new emerged, not as a blazing flame, but as a lasting light, gentle and full of hope. This legacy is not measured by years of power, but by the value of knowing when to let go. A new chapter has been written not in ink or decree, but in the meaningful silence of a family that chose love over tradition, understanding over status. In today's world, can modern monarchy survive the harsh challenges that lie ahead? What do you think? Can it adapt, transform, and grow in a society that no longer seeks formal rituals, but craves truth and authenticity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm truly looking forward to reading your honest perspectives. If you found this video meaningful, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so we can keep exploring more inspiring stories together.